She looked at the woman standing in the lobby and saw a problem. She saw a delivery uniform. She saw natural hair pulled back under a cap. She saw someone who didn't belong in the glass and marble atrium of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. What Regional Director Pamela Crown didn't see was the silver star on the woman's service record, the 3 combat deployments, the Distinguished Service Medal, sitting in a velvet box in that woman's apartment, 2 miles east. She didn't see any of it. She saw a target. And Pamela Crown had always been very good at selecting targets. This is the story of how an entitled hotel executive publicly humiliated a decorated Army combat surgeon, and how the karma that followed dismantled her life with the precision of a scalpel. The Whitmore Grand in downtown Hartsfield, Georgia, was the kind of hotel that existed to make ordinary people feel small. 16 stories of Italian marble and engineered silence, the kind of place where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's car payments, and the front desk staff were trained to smile in a way that communicated, without words, that certain guests were more welcome than others. On a Tuesday morning in late September, the lobby was moving at its usual quiet rhythm. Business travelers pulling wheelie bags, concierge staff murmuring into earpieces. The faint scent of bergamot piped through the ventilation system at precisely calibrated intervals. Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Marsh stepped through the revolving doors at 10:47 a.m. She was 44 years old, built lean and straight from decades of Army discipline, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and eyes that catalogued a room the way a surgeon catalogues an operating field, systematically, without wasted motion. She was not in uniform. She was wearing dark jeans, a fitted brown jacket, and the same broken-in running shoes she wore on her morning 5-miler. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a small package tucked under her arm, wrapped in brown paper and addressed in neat block letters. She was there to drop off a retirement gift for Brigadier General Howard Fenn, an old mentor who had checked in the previous evening for a 4-day conference of senior military medical officers. The general had called her the night before, laughing, telling her not to bother. She had told him that wasn't how she operated. She would be in and out in 15 minutes. She crossed the lobby toward the front desk. She never made it. "Excuse me." The voice came from her left, sharp and flat, the way a ruler sounds when it hits a desk. "Excuse me. The service entrance is around the back." Evelyn stopped. She turned slowly. The woman walking toward her was somewhere in her early 50s, blonde hair set in a helmet-stiff wave, wearing a blazer the color of oxblood, with a gold name pin on the lapel that read, Crow and Raid, Regional Director. She was moving with the practiced authority of someone who had spent years deciding who belonged where. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. Pamela Crown stopped a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her, chin lifted at an angle that communicated she was doing Evelyn a courtesy by addressing her directly instead of calling security. Her eyes went to the package under Evelyn's arm, then to the canvas tote, then back up with the faint expression of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. "The service entrance," Crown repeated, enunciating clearly, as though Evelyn might not speak English. "Deliveries come in through the loading dock on Clement Street. You'll need to check in with receiving. They'll log your package and get it to the right room." Evelyn looked at the woman for a long moment. "I'm not a delivery person," she said. Crown smiled the way people smile when they think they're being patient. "I understand, but the package—" "I'm a guest of General Fenn." Evelyn's voice was calm, the way a flat road is calm before it drops off a cliff. "I'm dropping something off, personally. At the front desk." Crown's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A small recalibration. The kind that doesn't produce a course correction. Just a different strategy. "I understand," Crown said again. "But I'm going to need to ask you to step aside while I verify that. We have an event this week, and we're being very careful about who accesses the guest areas." "Then verify it," Evelyn said. She set the package on the front desk counter, a few feet to her right, as she had intended to do from the moment she walked in. The desk attendant, a young man with startled eyes, looked between the two women and reached for his phone. "Room 103rd and 4, General Howard Fenn, tell him Evelyn Marsh is here." Crown moved to intercept, placing herself between Evelyn and the desk. "I'll handle this," she said to the attendant, without looking at him. Then she turned back to Evelyn, and her voice dropped into the register people use when they want to dress someone down without raising the volume high enough for witnesses. I don't know what your relationship is with whoever you claim to know in this hotel, but I need you to understand something. This property has a very specific standard of presentation, and when guests report feeling uncomfortable. Who reported feeling uncomfortable? Crown blinked. I beg your pardon. You said guests reported feeling uncomfortable. Evelyn's voice was still quiet. Quiet? The way Deepwater is quiet. Which guest? When? Where's the report? Crown's jaw tightened. That's not how this works. No, Evelyn agreed. What doesn't work is stopping a paying hotel guest in a lobby and telling her to use the service entrance because she doesn't look the way you think a hotel guest should look. That's what's not working right now. The lobby around them had done that thing that lobbies do when tension enters. A slight stillness, conversations dropping a register, heads that weren't turned that way now turning. A man near the elevator bank had a phone out. Not filming, just out. The way people carry phones when their hands don't know what else to do. Crown stepped closer, lowering her voice further. I'm going to ask you one more time to step outside and use the proper entrance, or I will have security escort you. Your choice. Evelyn looked at her. Then she looked at the man near the elevator bank. Then she looked at the desk attendant, who was holding the phone to his ear and going the color of a sheet of paper. Put her through, Evelyn said calmly to the attendant. General Fenn. Room Themond 4. Tell him I'm in the lobby. The attendant, operating on some frequency beyond his pay grade, did exactly that. Crown opened her mouth. The attendant said quietly into the phone, General Fenn, I have a Ms. Marsh in the lobby for you, sir. A pause. Yes, sir. Another pause. His eyes went wide. Understood, sir. Right away. Understood, sir. Right away. He hung up. He looked to Evelyn. Then at Crown. Then back at Evelyn. Lieutenant Colonel Marsh, he said, and he said the title carefully, like a man touching something hot. General Fenn would like me to escort you to the 11th floor personally. He'll meet you at the elevator. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. They were a very long 4 seconds. Crown's face did something complicated. The certainty drained out of it, replaced by something she was working very hard to disguise as composure. She turned to the attendant. Why didn't you? I tried, the attendant said, and there was nothing in his voice but the flat truth of it. You said you'd handle it, Miss Crown. Evelyn picked up her package from the counter. She buttoned the front button of her jacket, a habit from 30 years of preparing to enter rooms with generals in them. Thank you, she said to the attendant. Then she looked at Pamela Crown. Her expression wasn't angry. It was something more unsettling than angry. It was specific. I'm going to finish what I came here to do. And then I'd like to have a conversation with your general manager. Not a complaint, a conversation. She followed the attendant to the elevator. Crown stood at the front desk and watched her go. The elevator doors closed. In the cab going up, the attendant exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath underwater. I'm sorry about that, man, he said. She does that. Evelyn looked at the panel of drawer buttons. How often? The attendant didn't answer. He looked at the doors. His silence was its own kind of answer. Upstairs, Brigadier General Howard Fenn was already standing in the hallway when the elevator opened. He was a big man going grey, wearing the kind of civilian clothes that still somehow looked like a uniform. And when he saw Evelyn's face, his expression moved from warm to careful. Ev, he said. What happened? Got stopped in the lobby, she said. Directed to the service entrance. She handed him the package. Your retirement clock, don't lose it. Fenn took the package without looking at it. Who stopped you? The regional director, Crown. Fenn was quiet for a moment. He was a man who had learned, over 40 years, to be very careful about the moments when he chose to be loud. He took those moments seriously, because they were rare. Come in, he said. Sit down for a minute. I'm fine, General. Ev. He looked at her directly. I've known you since you were a captain, pulling shrapnel out of people in a forward operating base in Mosul. You are fine, but sit down anyway. She went in. She sat. They talked for 20 minutes. Not about Crown, not exactly. About what happened in lobbies, in airports, in restaurants, about the specific tax that gets levied on people who look a certain way in rooms that consider themselves important, about the quiet math of it, about how it compounds. When Evelyn came back down in the elevator, the attendant was not at the desk. A different person was there, a woman who smiled at her with the full-service warmth of someone who had been briefed. She asked to speak with the general manager. His name was Arthur Paulson, and he came out from a back office, looking like a man who had already received a phone call he wasn't happy about. He was polished, apologetic in the abstract way of hotel managers who know the word incident should never be allowed to become the word lawsuit. He offered coffee. She declined. She told him what had happened, factually, in order, without editorializing. She named the time, the words used, the witnesses present, including the man near the elevator bank, who had already, she suspected, uploaded something. Paulson listened. His face was doing the work of a man who had trained himself not to react while internally processing a Category 4 emergency. When she finished, he said, "Lieutenant Colonel Marsh, I want to assure you this is not." "Mr. Paulson," she said, "I'm not here to be assured. I'm here because I want the record to reflect that I came to you directly, professionally, and in good faith before anything else happens. That's all." She stood up. "Thank you for your time." She left her card on the coffee table and walked out. She didn't post anything. She didn't call anyone. She had a 1 p.m. appointment at the VA Medical Center across town, where she volunteered her surgical expertise twice a month to veterans who couldn't easily access care. She got in her car and drove there. The internet, however, had not been as patient. The man near the elevator bank had not been filming. The woman behind him had. Her name was Dorinda Nesbitt, a 41-year-old traveling sales manager from Cincinnati, who had been standing 15 feet back waiting for her own elevator and who, in the previous 18 months, had accumulated 340,000 followers on a social account dedicated to what she called real moments in real places. She had filmed 2 minutes and 11 seconds of the interaction without anyone noticing. Her hands had been very steady. She posted it at 11:22 a.m. with a caption that read simply, "This happened at the Whitmore Grand in Hartsfield, GA this morning." That woman being directed to the service entrance is a decorated Army veteran. The woman doing the director to the service entrance is a decorated Army veteran. The woman doing the directing is the hotel's regional director. Draw your own conclusions. By 2 p.m., the clip had 400,000 views. By 6 p.m., it had passed 2 million. The Whitmore Grand social team, which consisted of 2 recent graduates operating out of a repurposed closet on the mezzanine level, spent the afternoon in a condition that could only be described as controlled freefall. The brand's handles were being tagged in an unbroken stream. The phrases service entrance and Whitmore Grand were trending together in a way that no hotel marketing team ever wants to see. At 7:15 p.m., someone identified Pamela Crown by name. At 7:30, her LinkedIn profile had 1,500 new visitors. At 8 p.m., a veterans advocacy group with 220,000 followers posted the clip with a statement that read, "We are requesting an immediate response from Whitmore Hospitality Group regarding the treatment of Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Marsh, United States Army, retired, a combat surgeon with 3 tours of service and a Distinguished Service Medal." Pamela Crown, at that moment, was at a dinner party in the Buckhead neighborhood, accepting a second glass of wine and explaining to a tablemate that sometimes guests just needed firm direction. She found out about the video when the host's teenage daughter came in from the living room and put a phone on the table in front of her without saying a word. She looked at the screen. She put her wine glass down. She didn't pick it up again. She left the dinner party at 8:30, drove home, and spent the next 3 hours on her phone, calling her assistant, calling the Whitmore's PR director, calling a friend who was an attorney. The attorney told her to say nothing publicly. The PR director told her the same thing. Her assistant didn't answer. What none of them could tell her was how to make 2 million people look away. By morning, the number was 6 million. The Whitmore Hospitality Group, headquartered in Atlanta, issued a statement at 9 a.m. It was the kind of statement that corporate communications teams produce under pressure, full of phrases like deeply concerning and actively investigating, and we hold ourselves to the highest standards of inclusion and respect. It named no one and promised everything. At 11 AVUN, a second statement followed. This one named Pamela Crown. It said she'd been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review. At 2 p.m., General Fenn, who had not planned to give any interviews that week, gave one. He sat in a chair in his hotel room in a collared shirt and spoke for 8 minutes to a reporter from a national outlet. He was measured. He was specific. He used the phrase pattern of behavior twice, which was the kind of phrase that, in the mouth of a retired brigadier general with 40 years of documented service, means something different than it does when a PR team says it. He described Evelyn Marsh as the finest trauma surgeon he had supervised in his career. He described what she had done in Mosul, in Kandahar, in a forward operating base outside Fallujah that no longer existed on any map. He described it the way soldiers describe things, without decoration, in plain English, in the order it happened. The clip of that interview was shared 300,000 times in 6 hours. The requests for comment addressed to Pamela Crown went unreturned. Her personal social accounts went dark. The professional headshot that had been on the Whitmore Grand's regional leadership page was removed at some point Tuesday afternoon. No one announced the removal. It was simply gone, like a picture taken off a wall and the nail pulled out and the hole filled in. On Wednesday, Crown's attorney released a 3-sentence statement expressing regret for any misunderstanding and wishing Lieutenant Colonel Marsh well. It was the kind of statement that tries to close a door that has already been taken off its hinges. The internal review concluded on Friday. Pamela Crown's employment with Whitmore Hospitality Group was terminated, effective immediately. The announcement was made in a memo that circulated internally before it leaked, as internal memos always do. Which is to say, before noon on Friday it was in the hands of 2 journalists and 1 very active poster on a hospitality industry forum. The termination was described as mutual, which is the word companies use when they want to maintain the fiction that both parties had options. On Saturday morning, Crown logged into her bank account and looked at numbers she had spent 22 years building. Her severance was 3 months. The house in Dunwoody, the one with the finished basement and the landscaping she had supervised personally, and the kitchen she had renovated twice, carried a mortgage that required a salary she no longer had. She sat at her kitchen island, in the house she had spent a decade making perfect, and understood that it would need to be listed. Her phone buzzed with a text from a colleague she had known for 15 years. The text read, "Hope you're doing okay." This got big fast. That was all. That was the whole thing, and something about its smallness. The way it acknowledged without offering anything, the way it showed up and asked nothing of itself, made it worse than silence. She typed back "thank you" and set the phone face down. 2 weeks later, Evelyn Marsh returned to the Whitmore Grand. She was not returning to gloat, and she was not returning because she had been invited, though both things were true in their way. She was returning because Arthur Paulson had called her personally to say that the property's entire front-of-house staff was undergoing bias and de-escalation training, and to ask if she would be willing to speak to them directly, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone with operational expertise in high-pressure judgment calls. She said yes. She stood in the hotel's conference room on a Thursday afternoon, in front of 37 people who cleaned rooms and managed reservations and stood at front desks and escorted guests to elevators, and she talked to them for 45 minutes. Not about what had happened to her, about what happens to people who hold a certain kind of power and forget what it's for. She talked about judgment under pressure, about the cost of assumptions, about what gets lost when authority stops being a tool and becomes an identity. She wore the same brown jacket she had been wearing the morning she walked through the revolving doors. Nobody directed her to the service entrance. When she finished, a young woman near the back raised her hand and said, "How did you stay that calm?" Evelyn looked at her for a moment. "I knew who I was," she said. "When you know who you are, you don't need the other person to know it. You just wait." There is a version of this story where Pamela Crown is simply a villain, a small person in a large title, a caricature in a blazer. That version is easier. It wraps cleanly. It requires nothing of the audience except the pleasure of watching someone get what they deserve. But the harder version is the one that matters. Because Pamela Crown did not invent the instinct that moved her feet across that lobby, she inherited it. She practiced it. She was rewarded for it, year after year, until the morning she finally wasn't. And the question the man near the elevator bank and Dorinda Nesbitt and 6 million strangers with phones and eventually a boardroom in Atlanta all had to answer is whether accountability is the same thing as correction. Evelyn Marsh didn't answer that question out loud. She built a youth surgical mentorship program at her local VA with the settlement money, trained 17 young residents in her first 2 years, and showed up to every session in the same running shoes she wore on her morning 5-miler. She said when asked that she didn't do it to make a point. She did it because there was work to do, and she had always been very good at finding the work. That's how discipline sounds when it doesn't need an audience. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about who gets stopped and who gets waved through, and what it costs either way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that strength looks like composure, and justice looks like building something after, subscribe to Voices of Truth for more stories that don't look away from the hard parts. We'll see you in the next one. I keep coming back to the moment Evelyn picked up her package from that counter. Not the verdict, not the termination memo, not the 6 million views, that one small gesture, buttoning the front button of her jacket before stepping into the elevator, a habit 30 years in the making, is the part I can't stop thinking about. Because nobody was watching her do it. It wasn't for the cameras. It was just who she was doing what she always did. In a room that had just tried to tell her she didn't belong. That's the thing about character. It doesn't perform. It just runs. What happened to Pamela Crown wasn't punishment handed down by some external force. It was consequence, which is a different thing entirely. She built her authority on a foundation of assumptions about who people were based on how they looked, about who deserved the lobby and who deserved the loading dock. And when that foundation met someone it couldn't move, the whole structure came apart on its own. She didn't lose her job because the internet got angry. She lost it because 22 years of that kind of judgment had finally added up in a room where the math was being done out loud. I think about what it takes to be Evelyn in that moment. Not the military training, not the rank, just the human part. Someone has just publicly told you, in a marble atrium full of people, that you don't look like you belong. Every instinct you have is telling you to react, to correct the record loudly, to make the injustice visible right then and there. And she doesn't. She asks a question. She waits. She lets the facts do what facts do when you give them space to work. That's not passivity. That's a kind of intelligence that most people never develop because it requires something uncomfortable, the willingness to be misread in public without immediately correcting it, to trust that clarity will arrive on its own schedule, to know that how you carry yourself in the worst moment is the argument you're actually making. And then there's what she did after. The settlement money. The VA. The 17 residents. That's the part that gets me most. Because the easiest thing in the world, after what she went through, would have been to keep that money and let it be over. Nobody would have blamed her. Nobody would have even noticed. But she looked at what had happened and she asked a different question than most people would. Not what do I deserve, but what needs to be built. That takes something beyond intelligence and beyond composure. It takes a kind of moral grit that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, twice a month in the same running shoes, to do work that needed doing before the incident and will need doing long after. I don't think the lesson here is about Pamela Crown. I think it's about what Evelyn already knew when she walked through those revolving doors. That who you are doesn't require anyone else's recognition to be real. The lobby doesn't get to decide. The blazer with the gold pin doesn't get to decide. You already know, and when you know that, clearly and without flinching, you don't need the other person to know it. You just wait. And the truth has a way of catching up.